Blasphemous is a morbid Metroidvania from Spanish studio The Game Kitchen. The game has a very distinctive style, which is what first drew my attention to it. I've tried to show off a bit of this in the video's thumbnail, so given that you've clicked, I reckon the style is a big reason you're interested too. If that's true, should you invest your time and money to play the game yourself, or just look up some cool art on Google Images and call it a day? In this review, I'll take a deep look at the game and answer that question for you. Let's start with the premise. Everything in the world of Blasphemous revolves around a pervasive religion, and we open to our character, the penitent one, being revived from amongst his dead comrades. Some Inquisition-style hijinks seem to have taken place against this sect of pointy-hatted mutes, and the penitent one sets off to confront the ruling church about it. Along the way, he'll have to fight all manner of monstrosities. Your combat options are relatively simple to start with. You can do a standard 3-hit combo, dodge, roll, and parry. Combat is very methodical, and you'll be learning how to use these 3 bread-and-butter options to take out each new enemy you face. The vast majority of enemies will only do one type of attack or action, and the first time you encounter a new enemy, it'll usually be on its own so that you can understand what this action is and how you'll counter it. Shortly after that, you'll see that same enemy mixed in with other types, or placed within the environment in such a way that you'll need to change how you engage it. For example, this guy slides right up next to you and starts slashing extremely quickly, so the safest way of taking him out is to stand still and parry as soon as he slides into your face. Next time you see him, he's got this floating pope with him, whose downward strike is easy to dodge if you move fast, but very punishing if you stand still. This completely changes how you go about engaging these two, and it's this type of strategizing that keeps the combat interesting, engaging, and fun. As you progress, you'll purchase extra skills and upgrades that allow you to do more things, including a downward lunge and a ranged attack. You also have prayers, which are powerful spells that consume your blue fervor meter. There's a lot of them that you can find throughout the world, and they've got good differentiation between them that means you'll be switching them around a lot depending on what situation you face. Other things you can find throughout the world are rosary beads, sword hearts, and relics. The beads give some stat bonus, like an increased resistance to fire or a reduced cooldown on your dodge. The sword hearts are a bit like an extreme version of the beads, in that they give you a larger bonus but also come with a big downside. For example, there's one that increases your attack by a lot, but using it also doubles the damage that you take. The relics are a bit more important in that they can have big impact on how you play the game. As is traditional in a Metroidvania, early on you'll see a lot of items and areas that you can't reach, and you know you'll have to come back for them once you've unlocked some kind of new ability. In Blasphemous, it's mostly relics that will give you these new abilities. For example, these red platforms are only visible when the required relic is equipped, so they can have quite a big impact. These relics don't come easily or naturally though, and there are some that you need to put a lot of work into getting. This segues nicely into talking about the Metroidvania elements of Blasphemous. As is common in these types of games, you'll be doing a lot of backtracking and will probably get lost a fair few times. Your own tolerance for this kind of thing will play a big part in what you think of how Blasphemous executes it, but for me I'd say it's done well. What I mean by this is that there was usually enough things varied during a return through an area that made it feel worthwhile, like for example the new appearances of those red platforms. This is in a big part due to the way I played the game though. See, it's easy to miss a lot of these relics, and perhaps even a little bit too easy depending on your playstyle. I promise I'll stop going on about these red platforms soon, but let's use them as an example again. In order to get the relic, first you need to visit a vendor in a specific location and buy a key from them. This key unlocks a door right at the start of the game, so you travel all the way back and then the relic is behind that door. This might not sound too bad, but my point is more that it's pretty easy to miss. First of all, you could straight up just not buy the key, but to be fair, given the nature of these games, I would expect that most players do buy it. The bigger chance of missing the item comes with the journey back, because you might not remember the name or location of the locked door. Now, to be fair, you do loop back to the starting area naturally at some point, so it's possible to stumble across the door again then. Other relics are a lot less forgiving however, and it's quite possible that you'll miss the one that makes extra climbables from routes on your first playthrough. Depending on the way you play, this has the potential to make all the backtracking a lot less interesting, and could be a cause for a little frustration, or in worst cases, boredom. Of course, the solution to this is to explore more around your surroundings. Outside of relics, this will give you access to huge benefits like health and fervor bar upgrades. Some of these are even hidden behind illusory walls, which really drills home the importance of exploration. And it's not all backtracking by foot. You can use these mirrors to teleport to select locations around the world to speed things up a little bit. I wanted to draw attention to all of this because I think it's important to know what you're getting yourself into. In other Metroidvanias, exploration and backtracking to search for things you missed is encouraged and even expected. In Blasphemous, you could get to the final boss with pretty limited exploration if you really wanted to, which might make it feel somewhat optional. But to fully enjoy the game, you'll need to really embrace exploration and always be on the lookout for extra routes or rooms along your journey. The importance placed on exhaustive exploration does have the benefit of making everything feel a lot more meaningful, and could be called an example of the hard but fair design philosophy. This phrase gets thrown around a lot when talking about games that are even the slightest bit reminiscent of Dark Souls, and by that I mean the ones that are even the slightest bit hard. But Blasphemous is a hard game, and most of the time it's fair about how it handles this difficulty. The boss fights are a great example of this. They're a real challenge, and you'll probably die quite a few times while you learn their patterns and develop a strategy. There was only one boss I was able to kill on my first try, and outside of that, the difficulty they all presented is something I've not had the pleasure of seeing in a long time. There are a couple, however, where I think things go a little bit wrong. For example, let's look at the fight with this giant that happens early on. Most of this fight can be called hard but fair. She's got a bunch of different attacks she can do, and they're all telegraphed pretty well. You gradually learn how to counter or avoid each projectile that gets thrown at you, and the whole process is satisfying and fun. When she gets low on health, however, she brings out two hands and starts doing two projectile attacks at once. You can still dodge and counter most of these, but there's this attack in particular where the screen is just filled with so many projectiles that you have very little chance of avoiding any damage. It's random as to when the boss will do this attack, so you could end up having a bad run where it uses it more frequently than others. On the run I beat the boss, it didn't use this attack all that much, which made it feel like I just got lucky instead of actually improving my skills enough to beat it. This kind of thing doesn't happen all of the time, but it does happen a little bit too frequently for me not to mention it. The other difficulty aspect that can get frustrating is the platforming. Normally, when you jump near a platform or edge, you'll grab onto it and pull yourself up. This isn't true of all platforms, however. These crumbling platforms and any others that move cannot be grabbed under any circumstance. I can pretty much guarantee that you'll die a couple of times due to reaching for a platform that you can't grab onto, which I don't think is a great design choice. Each new area has new designs for the platforms that crumble too, so even when you get used to the look and feel of them in one area, you'll have to relearn to recognise and avoid trying to grab them again in the next one. There's also a lot of these spikes, which kill you instantly. I suppose they're just the same as having a sheer drop into nothingness, but there's just something about it that makes it feel a lot more punishing to land in them when you mess up a jump. Apart from these things though, the difficulty feels really fair, and I want to make it clear that I really enjoyed the challenge the whole game presented to me. I'm not a big fan of when anything remotely difficult gets compared to Dark Souls, but it's hard not to point out here that if you like the difficulty of Dark Souls, then you'll like the difficulty of Blasphemous. After beating the game, you'll go into New Game Plus mode, which increases the difficulty like you might expect. There's new bosses, story beats, and ways to shake up the gameplay too, which is a great way to extend your playtime if you can stomach the punishment. Another similarity to Dark Souls comes with the storytelling, in that it's all quite obtuse and vague. There's a small number of cutscenes to fill you in, and often the characters you meet along your journey will give you further backstory and info as to what's going on in the world. Outside of these, you'll be reading item descriptions a la Dark Souls to get filled in on the lore. The writing is all pretty great, and everything has such an air of eloquence about it. It immediately sets a great tone when you walk into an area and see it's called the Library of the Negated Words, or fight a guy whose title is the Exhumed Archbishop. This attention to detail extends to everything, including all your items, so it becomes impossible not to get drawn into the world. I know I said I'd shut up about the red steps, but one last time let's use them as an example and call it by its actual item name, which is Blood Perpetuated in Sand. That's awesome. Where the storytelling stumbles, however, isn't just how obtuse it can be. It's a lot of fun to piece together parts of a story through lore fragments, but a lot of the time what you're reading in one item can feel completely unconnected to what you read in the next one. What I mean by this is that they don't really build together all that much, and read more like individually cool tidbits and anecdotes as opposed to working towards something more cohesive. The idea was probably to leave enough room for you to come up with your own theories and interpretations, but given that there's so little actual details offered up, it's pretty hard to do so. This all culminates in the ending, or rather endings. There's a good one and a bad one, and I feel like I can say with quite some certainty that unless you look it up ahead of time, you'll probably get the bad ending on your first run through. I'm not going to say anything more than that because I want there to still be a sense of mystery for you after finishing this video, but if it's a clear and concise narrative you're after, then you'll have to look elsewhere. On the other hand, if you do just want to hear cool lore tidbits and let your imagination run completely wild, you could probably have quite a lot of enjoyment here. So in past videos I usually start by talking about the presentation, seeing as it's what you'll be looking at while listening to me rambling. This time though, I wanted to save the best till last, because the presentation here deserves nothing but praise. On a technical level, the pixel art is fantastic. For enemies, it's clear and concise in a way so that you can read exactly what's going on, and yet at the same time, everything is packed with so much detail that you'll enjoy looking at these monstrosities for hours. Design-wise, everything is just such a pleasure to look at. It should be no surprise at this point that the game takes inspiration from Catholicism, but we can actually go a bit deeper than that. The game kitchen is located in Seville, which is the capital of the Andalusia region in Spain. Looking at pictures of the city, you can immediately see how the architecture and environment served as direct inspiration for the game. Going one step deeper, the game takes a lot of inspiration from the city's annual Holy Week festivities, the Semana Santa de Sevilla. Schools and some workplaces close down for the week leading up to Easter for this huge cultural event, which includes processions of huge statues depicting biblical scenes. There's a lot of traditional dress and music that goes along with this too. A lot of design inspirations come from this, with the most obvious one being the design of the Penitent One's pointy helmet taking inspiration from the traditional dress of the Nazarenos. Once you start looking into this, you begin to notice more and more of it. Cards on the table, I really don't know a lot about it, but for those who do, I can imagine there's a lot of joy to be had in going through the game and noticing all the references. You can read more about the inspirations and reasonings behind all the designs in the art book, which comes with the digital deluxe edition of the game. There's so much artwork packed into it, and there's a lot of text too, so you get a great insight into the development and thought process behind everything. You don't need it to enjoy the game of course, but it might give you a better appreciation for some of the choices, and to be honest, I really just wanted to mention how great it is. So visually, everything is just fantastic. I was trying to think of anything slightly negative or constructive to point out, and all that I came up with was that this enemy looked a little bit too bright and colourful in comparison to the rest of the game. But then I read in the art book that it's based off this specific painting. So yeah, of course it's bright, and we're just going to move on and start talking about the music and sound. The music was composed by Carlos Viola, and it has a lot of Spanish and Andalusian inspirations. This is combined with the dark and gothic sounds that you would expect to hear from a Souls-like game. Hearing these types of music intersect is really interesting, especially because the Spanish side of the equation isn't all that common in games. It sets the tone really well and is a joy to listen to throughout. The other sound related thing I wanted to touch on was the voice acting. At default it's in English, and most of the performances in this language are really good. That being said, I highly recommend that you switch the language to Spanish.
I, Chrysanta in penance, excommunicate you, expel you, execrate you, with the blessing of our miracle of the greatest pain. And thus shall your name be erased under the heavens.
Yo, Chrysanta en penitencia, os excomulgo, os expulso, os execro, con la bendición de nuestro milagro del mayor dolor. Y así se borre vuestro nombre bajo los cielos.
There's actually a bit of a story behind this. When the game first launched in 2019, the team could only afford to have one language fully voiced, so from a commercial standpoint it made sense to do this in English. This led to disappointment both within the team and from the Spanish fans, because after all, it's not often that a game this heavy with Spanish influences comes out. In August this year, however, free DLC was released that contained a full Spanish dub. The voice actors they used are true heavyweights too, and famous in Spain for the dub work they do in video games and movies. We're talking the Spanish dubbers for Dwayne Johnson, Vin Diesel, Tom Holland, Paul Rudd, Emma Watson, David Hayter and many more. I point this out because for us outside of the country it might not go appreciated just how impressive this whole dubbing effort is. The performances are all phenomenal too, so I'm going to recommend you treat this like the original base and go in subbed over dubbed. Bringing all of this together, I'm going to say that Blasphemous is a great game that I fully recommend you try out. Gameplay is fun, strategic and challenging. The backdrop to this is just fantastic, and something that you just don't see represented in many other games. Overall, I think this game appeals directly to a certain type of crowd, and if you're one of them, then hopefully this has helped you decide to take the plunge and give it a go. If you're not part of that crowd, the issues I've raised throughout are the ones that I feel are probably going to be the most important when it comes to deciding if you won't like the game. Blasphemous is available on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch and PC, and this review was done on the PC version. If you liked this video, please consider letting me know by clicking the like button, and if you'd like to see more of this type of content in the future, consider subscribing not to miss out. You can also check out some of the other reviews I've done, which are on screen now. With that, I'll thank you for watching, and I hope you have fun if you do decide to give Blasphemous a chance. Oh, and you can even pet the dog, so if you're still on the fence, that might tip the scales.